All right, let's open the case file on a truly fascinating patient. Our subject is a 40-year-old former civil servant living in a self-imposed exile in 19th century St. Petersburg. Now, he tells us he's sick, but this isn't some physical ailment. Today, we're going to diagnose the sickness of consciousness itself. Let's dive in.
And right away, in his own words, he gives us our entry point. He mentions a bad liver, sure, but he brushes it off almost immediately. The real sickness, the one he truly identifies with, is psychological. It's a deep, all-consuming spite. And this single confession, it's going to be the key to our entire diagnosis.
So let's start with this main symptom, spite. For our patient, this isn't just a bad mood he gets into sometimes, no. It's the very engine of his entire being. It's this driving force that pushes him, again and again, into behavior that is completely self-contradictory and honestly just self-destructive.
And this, right here, shows you his logic perfectly. Just look at these clinical steps. 1, he knows he has a diseased liver. 2, he says he respects medicine and doctors. But 3, he absolutely refuses to see a doctor. Why? Purely out of spite. He's fully aware that he's the only one who suffers from this, and that is precisely the point. He lands on this wild conclusion. My liver is bad, well, let it get worse.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The patient himself actually breaks down his spite into 2 different types. First, there's the feigned spite. This is just a performance, he says it's just for scaring sparrows. But then there's the second type, the genuine spite, and this is the one we need to pay attention to. This is where he finds a kind of secret, twisted enjoyment in his own humiliation. He calls it a shameful, accursed sweetness. This is the core of his problem. He gets pleasure from his own pain.
So what is the root cause of all of this? After looking at the symptoms, we can offer a diagnosis. Our patient is suffering from a profound paralysis, not of his body, but of his will. And it's brought on by having way too much consciousness.
He actually has a name for his condition. Conscious inertia. And you can see from his own definition, it's a total shutdown of the will. His hyperawareness means that before he can do anything, he has to find the primary cause, the ultimate bedrock reason for that action. But of course, every cause has a cause before it, and he gets trapped in this endless loop of overthinking until he can't act at all. The result? Inertia. Just conscious, sitting with the hands folded. To help us understand this paralysis, he gives us 2 archetypes. First, you've got the man of action. This guy is simple, he's direct, maybe a little dense. He just charges forward like a bull and only stops when he literally smacks into a wall. Our patient, though, he's the complete opposite. He's the acutely conscious mouse. He wasn't born from nature, he was cooked up in a retort. He can't act because he thinks through every single possibility and then just scurries back into his little hole, stewing in his own spite. And this inertia just completely destroys his sense of identity. I mean, think about it. If you can't start anything and you can't finish anything, how can you become anything? You can't. He's trapped. He can't form a stable character. He's not a hero. He's not an insect. He's just nothing. A void defined by inaction. So, how does he cope with this? What's his defense mechanism? He escapes into these incredibly elaborate fantasies. It's fascinating. He builds an entire identity around doing nothing, calling himself a connoisseur of the sublime and the beautiful. In his dream world, he's a great man, a hero, a romantic figure. It's a classic move, right? Create this huge, grandiose internal world to cover up for a pretty miserable and empty external one. But here's the thing. This condition is more than just a personal problem. This paralysis of his consciousness actually becomes the foundation for a pretty radical philosophical rebellion. Our patient declares war, not on society, but on reality itself, on the very laws of logic, reason, and nature.
For him, the ultimate enemy is something he calls the stone wall. This wall is made up of all the hard, inescapable facts of life, the laws of nature, of science, of math. And the biggest, most insulting brick in that wall is the certainty that twice 2 makes 4. For the man of action, that's just a fact. But for our patient, it's a personal insult.
And this is the absolute heart of his rebellion. He's not arguing that twice 2 makes 5. He's just saying, I don't like it. He believes his own personal will, his simple desire, ought to be more important than objective fact. He absolutely refuses to accept a universe, that doesn't care one bit about his feelings.
This leads him to question the whole idea of rational self-interest. The idea that humans will always choose what's best for them. He thinks, if human behavior can just be calculated and predicted, what's left of our humanity? There has to be one advantage, he says, that's more important than all the others, one that all the experts and number crunchers always forget to include.
And here's his answer. The most advantageous advantage of all is your own free, unfettered choice. It's the right to want something that's stupid, something that's harmful, simply to prove that you are a human being with an independent will, and not just a piano key being played by the laws of nature. For him, the highest form of freedom is the freedom to choose your own destruction.
To try and explain this, he gives us this really shocking clinical example, a toothache. He argues that even in that kind of physical agony, there's a kind of enjoyment. His logic is that the groans and moans of the person suffering aren't just expressions of pain, they're a form of protest. They're a conscious, willful rejection of the laws of nature that are causing the pain. In his world, suffering becomes the ultimate proof that you're an individual, not just another cog in the machine.
Okay, so where does a philosophy like this actually lead? For our final assessment, we have to look past the grand theories and see his lived reality. We have to figure out the ultimate cost of all this hyper-awareness. The patient himself offers a pretty grim prognosis. By age 40, he's decided that to live any longer is just bad manners, vulgar, immoral. And why? Because in his worldview, a truly conscious person would have been so torn apart by their own awareness that they wouldn't have survived that long. Only fools and worthless fellows can stand to live. It's the ultimate dead end for his philosophy. It basically says that intelligence equals self-destruction. So from a clinical perspective, the judgment here is pretty clear. The patient's hyperconsciousness, far from being some elevated state of being, is really just a sterile poison. It's a self-consuming cycle of misery and inaction that makes it impossible to have any genuine growth or connection or meaning. In the end, it's just a cage.
Now, let's put his grand theories right up against his actual life, as documented in this case study. He spends years plotting revenge because an officer once moved him aside in a tavern. Look at this timeline. This is his grand rebellion against the stone wall. It involves borrowing money for a fancy new collar and failing multiple times to simply not move out of the way. And the climax? He finally manages to bump the officer's shoulder, and the guy doesn't even notice. Yet our patient goes home feeling triumphant. So all that talk about freedom and suffering, in practice, it boils down to this: a pathetic, unnoticed, and completely meaningless gesture. And so we close the file on this question. Our patient was convinced he was defending the greatest human freedom, the freedom of the will. But when that consciousness only leads to a toothache-like pleasure in your own misery and a life of petty, spiteful inaction, have you really achieved freedom? Or have you just managed to build yourself a more elaborate, more intelligent, and far more miserable cage?